to account for Horsemen's distribution is extremely important to everyone. So with that, Governor agreed to come down here to Oakmont, didn't pull his leg too hard, but he brought Kaitlin Fox with him to talk about this very important topic. So, Governor, I'll give it to you.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks everybody for sticking around for this last panel here. Yes, I think this is very important to the Horsemen. I really appreciate the passion of the last panel. Just listen to those guys reminds me why I do this, and while my career has taken me to the wagering side, I started on horse farms, grew up on horse farms. My father, grandfather, and even godfather were farm managers, and so it's my hope that bringing you guys a little information here will somehow contribute to the betterment of the Horsemen as a whole. So we are here today to give you a little bit of information on how to calculate and validate distributions. I know that sounds a little dry, but we can just break it down as how do you make sure you're getting your purse fund paid, right? Make sure you guys are getting the money, the Horsemen are getting the money that they're due. And I think that's obviously extremely important to all the Horsemen's welfare. So with that, I'll just give you a little bit about CHRIMS. CHRIMS is a nonprofit entity established originally in California. We service the whole state of California, no matter what the industry member. So that is Horsemen, that is tracks, that is ADW companies. And because of that, and the CHRB, the regulator out there, and because of that, we are truly impartial. Our board is comprised of a variety of interests, none of which have a controlling interest, and so we really serve the best interests of our clients. So we have a board that is comprised of a variety, as I said, and the TOC is one of those members. We have 30 plus years of servicing the thoroughbred owners of California, providing the Horsemen with information vital to confirming that here is what you are due from the wagering, here's what your purse fund is due from the wagering, here's what your breeder's fund is due from the wagering, and getting that to them timely and accurately so that they know that all the Horsemen are getting their due. Obviously, I come from as I said, the Horseman side, and so I try to think back to some of those discussions I've had over the years with my family and Horseman friends, and to really, how many times have we sat around talking about, how wagering occurs and how the distributions are made. And as you can imagine, it's not a whole lot, right? And it's obvious why, as the last panel said, Horsemen have a hard job. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Where do you get the time to learn about distributions, about calculating distributions, about different pools and all of that, about how tote works? I mean, it's really an uphill battle. You combine that with the last 20 years of wagering, where you've gone from going up to the window at the track, and now we have online and everything else. You've got a variety of new wager types that are so complex I don't even understand them sometimes. And on top of that, the distributions themselves have gotten more complex. And so you have distributions that are based off a single pool type. You make one kind of wager, and that wager type has a different distribution than all these others. Or it's based on the time of day, or the breed and the time of day. I mean, it's endless. California is a particularly thorny state on that end. So I think a lot of this and what we've seen is that this has led the Horsemen and Horsemen's groups to rely on long-standing practices and those relationships with the tracks and other entities that they're working with on these distributions. You get into these modes of operating where you get whatever it is, some kind of accounting from the track, and you take that because you think you're all working for the betterment, and maybe everybody is working for the best interests of the Horsemen. Everybody's above board. But we find that those relationships, especially where there's this level of trust and cooperation, tend to be, the ones where you discover something 10 years down the line, because there's not that fight, that drive to discover what the other guy's doing, right? And we want, we're all about those positive relationships and doing what's best for the Horsemen and working together. But it's like that old Reagan quote, right? Trust but verify. And if CHRIMS had a mantra, I would say that's it. Have that relationship. A good relationship of trust can be built on verification. Everybody agrees, this is what's due to the Horsemen. We're not going to fight about that part. Fight about all the rest of it, right? So that's really why we're here, is to help you guys do that verification. Kaitlin Fox, sitting here with me, is our COO. She's going to walk you through a little bit of what CHRIMS does, how we do it, and then bring that back to what you can do on your end to try to make sure that your Horsemen, your constituents are getting what they deserve, what they're entitled to under statute, rule, or otherwise. So I'll turn it over to Kaitlin for takeoff.
Thank you. As Gunnar said, my name is Kaitlin Fox. I'm the COO here at CHRIMS. Prior to joining CHRIMS and coming into the horse racing industry, I worked mostly with investment firms doing marketing and operations for mutual funds. And if you don't know much about that world, it is basically mental Olympics, kind of deciding what numbers to show and why you want to show them. And that experience really kind of hits home on the trust but verify front. And now in my role at CHRIMS, I can really appreciate having an independent way to validate numbers and to validate payments, things like that. So as Gunnar said, as Horsemen, the money that we're talking about here is what's funding your purses. So there really is no reason why we shouldn't be putting an emphasis on making sure you have confidence in those numbers and finding a way to do that. We're not intending for people to have malice here or thinking that people are doing this with negative intentions. I think a lot of times it's misunderstandings, it's like Gunnar said, long-standing relationships. This is just the way we've been doing it. So a lot of what we do in our process here kind of unearths some of those things and allows us to kind of dig deeper and find what's really happening with the raw data and make sure it's really valid. So I'm going to give you guys kind of a high-level, step-by-step process for what this would look like for you guys to handle it yourselves. High level because it is in horse racing, as I've learned, every single state is going to do it differently. So we are going to kind of give a broad look at what this process is and then kind of explain a little bit of how CHRIMS automates that and how we make that a little bit easier for you guys. Step one, and this is really the most crucial step. If you can't really get step one going, then there's really nothing else you can do in the process. That would be obtaining the tote data. This should be something that a provision that's in your Horsemen's agreements that you should have access, the ability to review your data, etc. You'll need to receive tote authorization forms of some kind of confirmation or authorization from your tracks or AEW partners. Give that directly to the tote, and then you'll be able to directly receive this information from the tote without any sort of middleman. This information can be overwhelming depending on your situation and how much of the information you need, what type of files you need. So really step two there is finding a way to review that data without it being totally overwhelming. So you're going to want to input that into some sort of database. You could either do an Access database or a SQL database if you know that kind of SQL language type stuff, or you could do Excel if you're really brave and you want to input all that data into Excel. Either way, in step two, you're trying to find a way to slice and dice this information to really pull out what you need to know from the tote data to then move on to the next steps. The third step is balancing, and this is one that Gunnar's going to talk about a little bit more in detail later about why it's so important, but it is a very important step of the process, and it really helps to highlight any variances, any discrepancies that the data might have, which allows you to move on to step four, which in our experience can be a pretty lengthy process. That's going to be trying to figure out how to fix those discrepancies with the various partners that you have. This could be communicating with tote, this could be communicating with tracks, or any other entities or partners that you're working with. And when you bring in humans into some of this process as far as communicating, I think we all know that could take a little bit longer. So after after that's finished, and once those variances and discrepancies are settled, even if they're small, it's really important to get those fixed. Then you can move on to applying the necessary calculations to that balanced, clean data. If you're using Excel, this would be formulas in your spreadsheet. If you're using a SQL database, this would be a couple lines of code that would help you to apply those calculations. Once those calculations are applied, now you have the amount that the data says your payment should be. You're able to take this confirmation of what the number is and use that as a proof of calculation in case there's any sort of other variances or discrepancies. You can kind of reconcile this against what the tracks and the ADW companies believe that they are owed, etc., they owe you, etc. And I know that that was kind of a quick, fast way to hear about a very long process, but it's essentially what we do at CHRIMS every single day. So we are taking those same tote files, we are receiving them automatically overnight, we're consuming that information, balancing it, reconciling it, and then applying those calculations. Then our data team is going to apply some quality control checks. They're going to make sure everything looks great, everything is working, and we're going to publish that into a reporting suite that is very easy to understand, very easy for you to draw logical conclusions quickly about what you are owed, what you should be seeing come through in payments, and then you can always use those reports for showing us proof of calculations as well. Our team also gets to go into it and help figure out those variances. When we go to balancing and reconciling, if there's an issue with a tote, it's our team that sits on the phone or sends emails over and over and over until there's a resolution. So that's basically how we do things at CHRIMS. We are going to use the exact same data that you have available to yourself. So there's a way that you can do it, but what we try to do is remove human error from the process. We try to automate it as much as possible to create systems and processes that make this independent and verifiable. I think Hunter's going to hit a couple more high points for you guys. But that is basically an overview of the really fun process of how to make sure you can get your distributions.
Thanks, Kaitlin. Yeah, so I just wanted to give you a few takeaways to leave here with today. The first one will be question your assumptions. This is, it's the first step of what CHRIMS does when we come in and start working with somebody. We're going to ask, okay, what are the calculations? What are your distribution calculations? How do you determine what is owed from the wagering takeout to the first fund? And we'll start digging into that. You got rules, you got statutes, you've got contracts, and go look at all those different pieces and make sure you understand what does it really say. Take a fresh look. Are we doing this correctly? That's a place where we get the biggest surprises when we start working with somebody. Anybody at ADW, a track, just going through and validating what they've already done sometimes makes people raise an eyebrow or two. So that would be number one. Have a little funny line up here, know thy data. And I stole that from our chief information officer who repeats it ad nauseum. And what that means is understand what files you have available. When the tote is going to send you a package of files, it's going to be multiple different types in there. You need to understand what are those files, why are they there, and within those files, what data fields are available. So if I want to make a calculation and I need this information, there's probably somewhere in those files that I can find it, or some places, multiple places that I can combine and come up with it. But if you don't understand the files, if you don't work to understand those, then you're going to be kind of lost. Tote, there's a lot of great people that work over all of the totes, and they're willing to talk to you and work with you, and they're just a great source of this kind of esoteric information. Every state is going to be different, as Kaitlin said. Some of you may have very easy calculations or only want to focus on, let's say, exports. That's a very typical one, right? Is the export post fee percentage that the horsemen get paid. So that's a simple calculation. It's how much was wagered multiplied by the host fee multiplied by the rate that the horsemen get paid off that host fee. Now, it's not so simple when you have hundreds of different locations and you have locations that all of a sudden show up and there is no host fee, or nobody knew that this location was wagering, or Nobody has ever, you know, bothered to get her out to putting a host fee on it or knew that they should. So there's some of those discrepancies I'll talk about next. But you know, you have more complex types of distributions. Again, this is for first fund or breeders or anything like that, where it matters if it's an in-state wager versus an out-of-state